This video is sponsored by Lighter Creative. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past weekend of competitive play and talk about what's currently winning the metagame. This week is for the weekend of February 7th and 8th, 2026, and I am just coming back from covering the Winter Ruin 3, a 70-player grand tournament that offered up a World Championship slot. And it's one of the many large GT-size events that we had over the weekend, so we have tons of results to talk about. I will link my coverage of that event down in the video description. Please go check that out because we had some absolutely insane games, both on the stream table and on the secondary table available for YouTube channel members. In fact, that event was won by Derek Apshay, who won it with a Orc Green Tide. And if you want to watch the majority of games Derek played over the weekend, you can check out my live stream or my recorded videos for tons and tons of coverage of him playing that list. But as a result of that event, I am very tired. It's almost midnight now as I'm recording this, and I'm gonna have to edit it and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and hop into the metagame breakdown. And we can see a continued success for the Necron faction, which is absolutely dominating the rest of the metagame currently. That includes 2 wins at Battlefield Birmingham, a win at the Dutch Master Season Finale GT, WetCon 2026, North Coast Winter Hell GT Invitational, Shuffle Wars 2, the Cupid Protocol, 7 Nurglemania, and the Beachhead Brawl 2026. Tau Empire also seeing some success at Dice Hammer Open, GT9, Shuffle Wars 2, the Cupid Protocol, in addition to Necrons, and Beachhead Brawl 2026. A lot of these larger events had multiple undefeated. Adeptus Custodes also doing similarly well. 2 of these results for Custodes were using the new Talons of the Emperor build using multiple Venerable Land Raiders. However, we do have one at Nailhammer 10 that's playing something a little bit more interesting. However, in addition to that, we also saw that Land Raider build do well at Danish Open Singles and the Grampian Gaming Guild February GT. Chaos Space Marines actually kind of coming out of the woodwork this week with a undefeated result at Battlefield Birmingham, as well as at Le Trône des Derniers. Astra Militarum took down the Dice Hammer Open GT9, as well as saw an undefeated result at Open de la Table Ovale. Salamanders took down the Gaming Expo 40k Open. Deathwatch also undefeated at the Beachhead Brawl 2026. Thousand Suns kicking second place with an undefeated result at the Dutch Master Season Finale GT. Tyranids at Black Hole Wars 2026. Adeptus Mechanicus at the Safeties Off Hellraisin Dale Praisen GT. Death Guard also took second place at the 7 Nurglemania with an undefeated result. And Orks winning the Green Dice Games Winter Ruin 3 that I mentioned earlier. So let's hop into those lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Lighter Creative, and in addition to making a wide selection of laser-cut terrain, Lighter Creative has also branched out into battle mats and wants me to showcase to you their new battle mat style. The folks over at Lighter Creative have been hard at work developing a new material for tabletop gaming mats. We've seen neoprene mats and we've seen vinyl mats, but this is a slip-resistant rubberized vinyl that's incredibly flexible and incredibly precise. The nice thing that allows Lighter Creative to do is actually put grid lines on their mat. Now, obviously, we've seen these before in things like vinyl mats. The big benefit of these over neoprene is that this material doesn't stretch like neoprene does. So you actually get accurate sizes on all your map cuts. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus here, but I did live stream an event recently where the mat on the championship table was just 59 inches long, which is a full inch too short. That doesn't happen with this style of vinyl terrain, and Lighter Creative has this new material that's crease resistant, has an anti-tear backing, and is actually slightly tacky, so it prevents your models and terrain from moving around. Now, we've talked about them in the past, but the grid lines and pre-placed objective markers on these mats are a life changer. They make it extremely easy to set up your boards, as well as to determine where things like deployment zones, table quarters, different areas of the battlefield for zone control are. We play a lot of Tabletop Simulator here on the channel, and these basically are like playing Tabletop Simulator, but in real life. So check out their mats, as well as their selection of laser-cut terrain features in the links in the video description. And huge thanks to Lighter Creative for sponsoring this video. And now, back to the content. So we're going to start at the Nurgle Mania event, where Fritz Peters went 5-0 with Necrons. And while most of the Necrons over the course of the weekend were using either Starshatter Arsenal or Pantheon of Woe, which seemed to be the standout detachments for the faction, Fritz was taking something a little different, that being Cursed Legion. Now, I actually streamed a little bit of Cursed Legion over the weekend, so I will link the video for that in the video description as well if you are interested. However, in this case, Fritz was running a Deceiver as well as a Nightbringer, so we do have some Catan action. Necrosor Ementar, Imatek the Stormlord for some command point generation. An Overlord with the Destroyer Onk. Overlord running a Void Scythe, by the way. Destroyer Onk giving that guy the Destroyer Cult keyword, as well as a essential leadership ability. It just gives his whole unit +2 movement. Doesn't require that he leads a unit, so if he's by himself, he also improves his own speed, but it also affects everything in the unit that he's attached into, as well as +2 to his attacks characteristic, putting his Void Side up to 5 attacks. From there, we also have a Technomancer with Murder Mind, which also grants you the Destroyer Cult keyword and allows you to attach into Destroyer Cult units. This also gives the Cryptek +3 inches of movement, and the benefit of that Destroyer Cult keyword allows it to be affected by a lot of the stratagems in the detachment, as well as allowing the unit to trigger the second clause of the Cursed Legion detachment ability. That grants +2 strength to all other models besides Destroyer Cult units as soon as a Destroyer Cult unit either destroys an enemy unit or brings it below half strength. This means that whatever unit the Technomancer hops into can trigger that effect. Same goes for the Overlord. The Technomancer and the Overlord will also gain the baseline +2 strength that all Destroyer Cult models have naturally, but because that effect affects models and not units, they will have to trigger the second half of the detachment ability to give everything, not just Destroyer Cult units, +2 strength, in order for the rest of their unit to be affected. Now, from there, we are also running a pair of Canoptic Reanimators. This is actually becoming more and more common as these tankier, more aggressive Necron lists get designed. The Canoptic Reanimator has a 4+ feel no pain itself, so it's very difficult to kill. It acts as a good sort of bulwark or a utility unit that's extremely disincentivizing for your opponent to interact with, and it can follow around units like the Catan Shards or the Big Bricks in this particular army list in order to enhance their reanimations. We then have a unit of Canoptic Tomb Crawlers, a big unit of Canoptic Wraiths, 6 Canoptic Wraiths. I imagine that the Technomancer is going to hop into them. There is some benefit from Murder Mind giving him +3 inches of movement, and then, as I said before, allowing the Canoptic Wraiths to trigger Destroyer Cult stratagems and the Destroyer Cult ability, but it still allows him to attach into that unit and embed alongside the Canoptic Tomb Crawlers. We then have a Lich Guard unit for the Overlord to hop into. Nice thing here is that that unit's going to be able to get that movement buff, and there is an advance in charge for Destroyer Cult units, which allows these guys to get into melee more easily. In this case, we are taking them with Dispersion Shields and Hyperphase Swords. There are, I know, some builds that are running Void Sights on these guys as well, which are very popular, but in this case, we're taking the slightly tankier version. And for utility, we have a pair of Ophidian Destroyers with 2 Scorpec Destroyer units for some damage output. Now we're going to go from Necrons over to Tau Empire and go to the Dice Hammer Open GT9, which saw Jason McKenzie go undefeated. He did end up taking second place to Astra Militarum, but did go 5-0 at the event, running a Retaliation Cadre. Now, while a lot of Tau armies are running Montka right now, which tends to be a very well-rounded detachment with an incredible alpha strike, lots of flexibility, and the ability to basically dominate your opponent if it's able to go first, with massive numbers of forward operators and scout moves, Retaliation Cadre also has a massive amount of damage output as well as more flexible kind of passive attrition play. In this case, we were running Commander Farsight plus a Cold Star Commander with Starflare Ignition System to allow his unit to pop up and down. That guy was running Missile Pods so that he could join into a unit of Missile Pod equipped Fire Knife battlesuits. That unit is very helpful to basically cut sides of the table and clear out enemy utility units without having to engage any of the larger battlesuits. You can then use the Torch Star Gambit to run those guys back away after they engage into something, even if you have to extend yourself pretty far forward in order to attack it. And with the bonus movement from the Cold Star Commander, you can Torch Star Gambit pretty far. We have a Broadside Battlesuit with a Heavy Rail Rifle, that Fire Knife Battlesuit team I mentioned earlier, 1 unit of Star Scythe Battlesuits. Those guys are all equipped with Tau Flamers. We have 1 Ghost Keel Battlesuit, a Hammerhead Gunship, 1 unit of Groot Carnivores for some objective secure, some spotting and early game board control from a Pathfinder team, those guys rocking a Recon Drone, 1 additional scout in the form of a Piranha unit, 3 Riptide battlesuits, those guys all equipped with ion accelerators, 2 units of stealth battlesuits, and Vespid Stingwings for utility. Not quite as crisis heavy as we've seen some builds of Retaliation Cadre, but in this case, we do have a ton of utility from all those smaller individual vehicles that are able to run around and keep the army scoring very consistently on secondaries. Now, discussing Adeptus Custodes, we're going to go over to Nailhammer 10 and talk about Finn Smith's list. Now, as I mentioned before, Adeptus Custodes had a ton of players rocking the Talons of the Emperor double Land Raider list that we've talked about quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. However, in this case, Finn was running Solar Spearhead instead, and focusing on a extremely vehicle-heavy build. In this case, he was running a Blade Champion with Adamantine Talisman to improve his attacks, strength, and damage characteristics, as well as a Telemon Heavy Dreadnought with Augury Uplink. We had a unit of 5 Custodian Guard. No Kyria Draxus in this particular list, so that's where the Blade Champion was going to hop into to act as a counterpunch and a follow-up unit to any of these big, heavy vehicles that were going to initiate the peace trade with your opponent using the bonus movement that Solar Spearhead gives units, its walker units. We have 2 Caladius Grav tanks, both of those with blaze cannons, unsurprisingly, a Contemptor Achilles Dreadnought, as well as 1 unit of Prosecutors, a second unupgraded Telemon Dreadnought, as well as a trio of Venerable Contemptors. The Custodes Venerable Contemptor, for those who don't know, because we haven't talked about Solar Spearhead in quite a while, are able to respawn themselves on a 2+ when destroyed, essentially coming back like a regenerating character or Gilliman or something like that, alongside a Witch Seeker unit. Now, the Solar Spearhead detachment ability improves the speed of all of those walkers. It gives them an objective control characteristic to all non-aircraft vehicles, as well as giving those vehicles reroll ones to hit in place of the objective control characteristic if they are ever damaged, and reroll ones to wound if you bring them below half strength. That makes the army that is largely 2+ weapon skill and ballistic skill incredibly consistent, assuming that you are a vehicle. We do have a little bit of support for units like the Guard, the standard Custodian Guard unit. That includes things like Emperor's Vengeance to give them fight on death so they can eat charges in response to their advance and charge turn after they get into the fight in order to get another activation, and Wrathful Advance, which allows them to pile in D3+3, making slingshots, weird combat movements available for the Blade Champion. But that said, the focus of this detachment is on the vehicles, and that's where most of the damage is going to come from. This Custodian Guard unit, despite being the focus of many other builds for Custodes right now, is more of a counterpunch. Now, moving on from there, let's talk about Chaos Space Marines and a really interesting build that we saw do well at the Battlefield Birmingham. This was piloted by Ed Watts, and he was playing none other than Nightmare Hunt, the new Battleshock-themed detachment that came out as a digital release. In this list, Ed was playing a Chaos Lord with the Terror Glut Parasite, which forces a -1 Battle Shock test at the start of each fight phase to something that he's engaging. We had a Chaos Lord with Jump Pack with Serosent Vulture, which allows him to join into a Warp Talons unit and gives his entire unit Scout 6, as well as Fabius Bio. We have a single Cultist Mob, 2 units of Legionaries, as well as 2 Chaos Rhinos to deliver them, and a Chosen Squad, 3 units of the new Raptor datasheet that comes with multiple heavy melee weapons, so these guys are able to deal some actual damage in addition to forcing more Battle Shock checks in order to make use of the detachment abilities. We had a 10-man unit of Warp Talons in order to hop that Sorosent Vulture Lord into, as well as 3 units of Noise Marines. The Noise Marines can apply a penalty to Battle Shock checks, which can then stack with any additional Battle Shock checks that you can apply from the army. That includes the one for being below starting strength from the detachment ability, as well as additional checks from Horrific Incursion, stratagem when you arrive from reserve, which you can duplicate potentially multiple times thanks to the Warp Talons being able to kill units and re-enter reserve and then come back in, as well as with the Foot Chaos Lord's Terror Glut Parasite. So we have tons of ways to force Battle Shock checks that can stack both the detachment ability as well as the other units, the Noise Marines and the Raptors, that can force -1 penalties on those checks. Now we're going to return to the Dice Hammer Open GT9 and talk about the winning list that actually took first place on Tiebreakers. This was from Andrew Dickinger, who was playing Astra Militarum with Grizzled Company. This one was including a pair of Cadian command squads, a Commissar, Gaunt's Ghosts, a trio of Militarum Tempestus command squads, Norg Deadog, as well as 2 Primaris Psykers. We had a Cadian Shock Trooper unit, 2 units of Attilan Rough Riders. Those are just 5 model units, so not the big 10 model bricks, just the little ones. We have 2 Bulgren squads, which can then receive orders from the Master Vox of the Commissar with Abhuman Detail, which can embed into one of the Cadian command squads. Nork can hop into the other Cadian command squad to buff up their defensive stats. We then have 2 Khazarkin units, those guys for some early game skirmishing, a pair of Torox Primes, as well as a trio of Militarum Tempestus Scion squads. Those are going to join in with the Tempestus command squads, and I imagine at least 2 of them are going to join with those Primaris Psykers. The reason for that being is that we can hop them into the Torox Primes. We can jump those guys out, potentially get wound rerolls either from the detachment ability or the Scion's datasheet ability. You can then use the Tempestor Prime's orders or the Gaunt's Ghost to arrive after the Tempestus command squads disembark in order to apply multiple buffs to these things and further pump up the Primaris Psyker's damage output. The nice thing about the Torox Prime as well is that with its transport support ability, which gives you hit rerolls, you're able to improve the accuracy of the Primaris Psyker, which allows it to further trigger sustained hits, which it gets when it dual attaches with the Tempestus command squad. So your sustained hits, in most situations, rerolling full hit and wound rerolls, hitting on 2s with Take Aim, on D6 plus 1 blast, 2 damage devastating attacks. You can further improve this with Aquilin Eye, which is on one of the command squads, which allows him to issue the target weak spot order and give an additional bonus AP to the unit if they attack enemies within 12. So if you fully combo them out, you can also push that Primaris Psyker up to AP 3. I have a whole video I think I made way back in the day talking about how good the Primaris Psyker and Tempestus Scion combo was in Index Astra Militarum. It's been a really long time since we've seen the Codex variety, and makes this list really unique. It's cool to see Torox Primes and their Tempestus Scion bricks return to vogue after so long not being played. Now, starting on Space Marines, which had a bit of a quiet week this week, we're going to talk about Salamanders at the Gaming Expo 40K Open, where Glenn Ray went 5-0 with the sub-faction. In this case, Glenn was playing Forge Father Seekers with a Jump Pack Captain with Immolator, a Combi Lieutenant, as well as Vulcan and Heston. No Adrax Agatone, which blows my goddamn mind. We have an Intercessor squad, 2 Impulsors, as well as a pair of las cannon-equipped Centurion Devastators, 3 Centurions in each of those. These guys will get the detachment ability benefit, so they're going to be able to advance and shoot, which improves their mobility quite a bit. We have an Incursor squad, as well as 2 5-model Infernus Marine units, a Repulsor, as well as 2 Scout squads for utility, a big Vanguard Veteran squad, that's for the Immolator brick, as well as a pair of Vindicators for some dedicated anti-tank. Now, obviously, we do have some classic combinations in here. The Captain with Jump Pack with +1 attack to torrent weapons with Immolator can give him devastating wounds for 2 CP, give rerolls from Vulcan, and then blow something up, average 1,000,000 mortal wounds. And then we have 2 Impulsors with those Infernus Marines in them to easily deliver lots of Strength 6 auto-hitting torrent attacks, and 2 OC Infernus Marines to objectives in order to keep your opponent's score down. Now, sticking with Space Marines, we're going to go over to one of the largest events of the weekend, the Beachhead Brawl 2026, where Stephen Box went undefeated with a Black Spear task force. Stephen from Vanguard Tactics has been banner-bearing for the Deathwatch sub-faction for a while here, and I know he's classically a Deathwatch player from back in 8th edition, playing his very unique blend of the Black Spear Task Force, including Terminator Librarians. In this case, he's running a Gravis Armored Captain with Tome of the Ectoclades, a Judiciar with Beacon Angelus, as well as a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, Thief of Secrets Watchmaster, and that Terminator Librarian. We have a pair of Deathwatch Veteran Squads, 10 models in each of those, with all melee loadouts, 4 power weapons, and 4 Deathwatch Thunderhammers, a Xenophase Blade on the Sergeant. We have a Rhino to deliver one of those, most likely the Watchmaster unit for some additional threat range. A big Deathwatch Terminator squad, 3 Cyclone missile launchers in that one, plus 7 Thunderhammer Storm Shield equipped Deathwatch Terminators. That's for the Librarian to hop into. He gives them sustained hits, both in shooting and in melee, regardless of mission tactics, so they're going to be able to use those throughout the entire game. We have a pair of Fortis kill teams to provide some backline shooting, as well as a Hammer Blow Indomitor kill team unit that we can join the other captain into, and then he can consistently grant his command point cost reduction on things like site-to-site teleporting or mission tactics. We, last and certainly not least, have an Infiltrator squad to protect the backline. Now, moving off of classic Space Marines and over to some Chaos versions, we're going to talk about Thousand Sons, who were able to take second place at the Dutch Masters Season Finale GT. Martin van der Most went 5-0 with the faction, running a Grand Coven. This included a Winged Demon Prince with Eldritch Vortex, a trio of standard sorcerers, as well as a Terminator Sorcerer with Umberlific Crystal, 3 Rubric Marine squads to attach the sorcerers into, 1 Chaos Rhino to deliver some of those guys to the fight. We have a big unit of Scarab Occult Terminators for the Terminator Sorcerer to hang out with, a unit of Zangor Enlightened with Spears, as well as 2 units of standard Zangor for utility, and last but certainly not least, a little bit of infiltration from a Sekitar robot unit. Fairly standard stuff for Grand Coven varieties. We've been seeing a lot of these builds that run Magnus plus the 10-man of Scarab Occult Terminators plus the Winged Demon Prince to do a little bit of skirmishing crop up over the last couple of weeks. Now, with that, moving on over to Tyranids, we're going to move over to Black Hole Wars 2026, a relatively smaller event, but cool to see the bugs doing well. Alexander Kondakov went undefeated with a Subterranean Assault build. This included a Hive Tyrant, a Hyper-Adapted Ravager Squad, a Nero Tyrant, as well as a Trigon Prime. We had 2 units of Hormigons for some objective disruption, a Biovore for scoring, a little bit of damage output from a Haru Specs, as well as a Tyrannifex with a Rupture Cannon, and a big 6-model Zoanthrope unit for enflating Emergence and to hang out with the Nero Tyrant. We had a bunch of utility and some infrastructure assembly from a pair of Raveners, a Nero Lictor, and mid-board control from a pair of Maleceptors. Pretty standard stuff from Subterranean Assault. This is a much more normal build than the ones we've been discussing recently that bring a Herod in. Now, we also saw a little bit of success from Adeptus Mechanicus over at the Safeties Off Hellraisin Dale Praisin GT. Colin Watts went 5-0 with a Skitarii Hunter cohort, the more defensively oriented variety of Adeptus Mechanicus. Very similar abilities, kind of overlapping effects in a lot of cases to Halo Screed Battleclade, but Skitarii Hunter cohort allows you to further improve the survivability of your units rather than having bonuses to your threat range or damage output, or at least as many bonuses as Halo Screed does. In this case, we're running Belisarius Call, a Skitarii Marshal with Cantic Thrallnet, as well as a pair of Skitarii Rangers for battle line synergies. We had 2 units of 3 Iron Strider Ballistari, a unit of Terexi Skystalkers, just 5 of those, 2 units of 5 Sicarian Infiltrators to keep enemies off the midboard, 2 units of Sicarian Rust Stalkers to stab people and kill them in melee, as well as a trio of Scorpius Disintegrators with Pharamite Cannons for some long-ranged damage output. Now, moving on to Death Guard, appropriately, they went 5-0 at the 7 Nurgle-Mania, going second place to Necrons, which we talked about earlier, but still going 5-0, just losing out on tiebreakers. In this case, they were piloted by Christian Mushalek, who was playing a Virulent Victorium. This included a Demon Prince of Nurgle with Revolting Regeneration, a Lord of Contagion to hop into a unit of 3 Destrad Terminators, plus Mortarion, the big man himself, and a Tallyman for command point generation. Lots of utility coming from a trio of Chaos spawn units, as well as 2 units of Poxwalkers. In Virulent Victorium especially, these guys will obsec objectives that they start on, so they're extra useful. We have another unit of Destrad Terminators in addition to the one that the Lord of Contagion is joining into. However, this one doesn't have any attachments, so they're just going to be hanging out. And ranged support coming from 5 total drone units. That includes 3 Mephitic Blighthollow drones, as well as 2 Fetid Blow drones with heavy blight launchers. And that moves us over to the final list of the week, that being Orks, that I live streamed over at the Winter Ruin 3 GT, being piloted by Derek Epshay from 40k Dirtbags. In this case, Derek was playing a Green Tide list, which was a pretty shrewd metagame consideration, especially given the fact that a lot of people are really worried about killing heavily armored enemies. There's a lot of Ultramarine builds going around that have massive numbers of heavy vehicles. A lot of Space Marines are falling back on vehicles. Grizzled Company has lots of big vehicles as well, on top of course, the ever-present threat of Catan Shards in builds like Pantheon of Woe and Starshatter Arsenal. And Green Tide has what it takes to fight those. It has a massive numbers of objective control characteristic. It has pretty solid damage output with large numbers of boys that can attack a bunch of times, especially on the WOG, and use the WOG banner from Ghazghkull Thraka to get improved critical hits and lethal hits from Makari. We then also have access to stratagems like wound rerolls, as well as go get 'em for weird reactive moves during your opponent's shooting phase, which makes it very difficult for a lot of these big, heavy, tanky, armored armies to deal with. In this particular build, we were running Boss Snickrot for some utility. He was just hopping around to get some early game secondary scores. Ghazghkull Thraka, the great man himself, a pain boy with bloodthirsty belligerence, which allows his unit to reroll advance and charge rolls as long as the unit is at that 10 model threshold, which is pretty easy because he can dual attach with Ghazghkull Thraka. Normally, that's the spot where you would put a mech with the little teleporter so you can reroll advance rolls. However, the enhancement here basically gives you a very similar ability, and then the benefit of the Pain Boy is you get the ability to regenerate models back to the unit, and you can stack that with Come On Lads for an additional D3 plus 2 regeneration. So that unit can actually be incredibly difficult to kill. We have a pair of war bosses. The big thing here is that they were going to join into units of 20 boys, and then most of the damage from the army was coming from these characters, Ghazghkull and the war bosses, where they would just slingshot around using combat movement and try to get their big power claw attacks onto important targets. We then had a Weird Boy for some late game objective grabbing with to jump, as well as Zodgrod Wartsnaga. We had 3 units of 20 boys. That's where all the characters would hop into, the Ghazghkull Thraka as well as the war bosses. We had then 3 additional units of 10 boys, and I believe Derek typically played the Weird Boy in one of these to act as kind of a utility squad. We had a truck to deliver another unit of boys, as well as a battle wagon to deliver yet another unit of 20 boys, a big unit of 20 Gretchen for Zodgrod to hang out with a -1 to be wounded from Zodgrod. These guys work as kind of honorary boys in a lot of cases, and they give you a big scouting threat, so you can body block any enemies or try to engage them that would be able to deal with any of the boys units or try to tar pit Ghazghkull from getting to the targets you want to. So one flank can get totally tar pitted down by Zodgrod, while the boys can swarm unmolested on other quarters of the table. We then have a commando unit for early game utility, as well as a storm boys unit for some additional deep striking, and a Gretchen unit, just an 11 model Gretchen unit to stand in the back. This army basically hung most of its hat on the use of those characters for damage output. You do get some output from the boys and the knobs inside the units, of course, especially on the WOG turn where you get the extra strength attacks and the benefits of Makari's banner. And most of the time, Ghazghkull Thraka was placed in the center so that you could get the benefit of that if you were almost anywhere near Ghazghkull's team. And if you could get 2 or maybe even 3 boys units engaged on the WOG turn, you could usually do enough damage that you could attrition out from there. All of the larger boy squads would get a permanent 5+ invulnerable save, so they were still resilient even in post-WOG turn. And the idea was basically to use that to bully primary objective as long as possible. With so many boys on the table, there's OBSEC everywhere. If you ever wrest control of objectives, the boys are going to OBSEC it, and you can do that more easily with Command Lads to pay a CP to regenerate boys back into a unit. That happens in your command phase, so it happens before you check for objective control, which means you can regenerate onto an objective if you're within 3 or so inches of it, take the objective away with OC2 boys, and then OBSEC the objective and then leave and go do something else. So the ability of this army to bully the primary is absolutely insane, on top of the fact that it is also just, in many cases, swarming and just jailing its opponents into their own deployment zone, which prevents them from being able to contend with secondary objectives as well. Very interesting build. Cool to see a bit of a counter meta build do incredibly well, as well as success from Orks, which have been a little beleaguered over the last couple of weeks. And again, if you want to watch games with this list, you can check out the link in the video description for my coverage of the Winter Ruin event, as well as some of my recorded games that include Derek's Round 1. But with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. My apologies for this kind of rapid-fire episode. I am really tired. I'm going to throw a big shout-out to our sponsor this week, Lighter Creative. Big shout-out to them for being amazing and a ongoing supporter of the channel. Speaking of supporters, everyone who supports me either over on Patreon, YouTube channel membership, or over on Twitch as a Twitch subscriber, all you people are amazing, and I love you very much. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.